So welcome, everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order. It is 6:07. We are in the Nashua North Boardroom. The clerk tonight will be Miss Raymond because Miss Lampier is off having far too much fun. Do you mind doing the roll call?
Sure. Ms. Bishop?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Ms. Prin is not here. Ms. Daniels-Williams?
Here.
Mr. Claffey?
Here.
Ms. Darling?
Here.
Ms. Gilio is not here. Ms. Lampier is not here, and I am here. We have a quorum.
By the skin of our teeth.
Yes, and we also have Dr. Andrade. I know Tuesday night is hard because it's not usual.
Right. We had a day off. Well, we had an evening off yesterday. I'll take only working an 8-hour day. Okay, so before we start, I do want to just give a moment of silence. Our good dear friend Jimmy McLean, who was our ETV camera guy, passed away on Friday after a short but quick cancer diagnosis. He was over at Merrimack Hospice House and passed with his family around. And when they told me, I said, Jimmy's having a good old laugh right now at how sad we all are. If we had a bigger audience, I'd say let's all share our favorite dad jokes that he absolutely loved, but I think we can all do that on our own. But I just want to give a huge hug to Jimmy's family. We've got to know him over the years, and he was a fascinating, amazing fellow. And I think when you pass, your energy goes back to the happiest times in your life, and you get to live there forever. And his life just sounded amazing, and he's just going to have a fantastic time reviewing all of that without us, who will sit here and miss him. So thank you for that, guys. If we want to just take a minute to reflect, I'd appreciate that. Thank you, guys. Okay, now we get into the nitty-gritty of our meetings. Hold on, I'm in the wrong screen.
We have to do the pledge.
We do have to do the pledge. Thank you. I'm like pulling up my emails. What do you mean count? They all count. Okay. Oh, we actually don't have it on. We don't have the prayer or the pledge, but if we want to do it, you can. Ms. Raymond, if you could do the prayer, and Mr. Claffey, you can lead us in the pledge.
Wait. Almighty God, we have the high honor and the serious duty of managing the educational institutions of our beloved city. In our common endeavors, may we find a spirit of unity and understanding, which will enable us to face our multiple problems with an objective mind, with justice and charity for all, so that any and all decisions made by us will be for the betterment and greater happiness of all our fellow citizens. Amen.
All right. So one of the things that I wanted to focus on tonight was circling back to that conversation that we had earlier about our board goals. And I was hoping to have kind of an organic discussion, but with some questions as guidelines. So just a little feedback on how you felt the SWAT activity went, what your feelings were on the last meeting where we discussed board goals. None? Well, I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was really neat that I came up with, no, just kidding. I didn't just come up with it. I thought it was really neat how even though we were all had our own separate ways to communicate, as we all said the same thing. I did kind of bring it all together and come up with some board goals, but before we get there, I want us all to be on the same page in regards to the goal setting and how this is going to guide us in the future. So one of the things that Dr. Andrade had given to me to read was, what was the book called? It's this book, Great on Their Behalf. And it's about how to run school boards, and I've obviously done my own little bit of research. There's a lot of journal articles on good board governance. But this is the book that I was referring to in creating measures, in creating the goals, and the questions that I am going to use to guide our conversations come from almost like a book club book questions about these, but you don't need to have read the book in order to participate. So I can see by my first question of how did last time go, the resounding feedback I got, I think is probably going to show us what the rest of the night's going to look like. So please chat. Okay, so. I have a question. Yes, please.
Thank you. So we had those great SWOT diagrams, but I failed to take a picture of them with my cell phone, and I'm wondering if they're available to help kind of, jog our memories, someplace that we could see them. I know we don't have the computer up, but I couldn't find them in the minutes of the meeting either.
Right. I think we were hoping it was going to be on YouTube, and there was a little bit of a snafu in recording. And
right.
But we do. I took notes on it, but it looks like Dr. Andrade is pulling up something. Is that the finished one, or?
Show me in notes. If I don't, I like my notes for discussion.
So that's what was kind of fun about that, was we were also in the moment that we weren't taking the copious amount of notes that we normally do, which I thought was fantastic. But my gosh, I look so disorganized. Here we go. So when we were talking about, and we can.
I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt you again. I was wrong. I looked at the wrong date. It is under there, under the minutes for the first September meeting. I just clicked the wrong one.
Oh, okay. So when we were doing this, I kind of read back all of our answers and condensed them, because some of them were the same words, but just a little different. So the strengths that we identified were, the strengths of the school district were our diversity, our staff, our facilities, and our curriculums. And our creativity. Some of the, what is it, the weaknesses?
Opportunities.
Well, the W.
Oops.
Okay, so the W's that I wrote down after we discussed, so the W's being what do we view our school district's weaknesses are, because once we identify weaknesses, we know where to patch the holes. The equity amongst schools, staffing and turnover, the rigor of high school and middle school classwork, and then our communication and how transparent we are in regards to getting information out. The opportunities that we identified were engagement and communication. So opportunities are, where do we see the best amount of work happening? Engagement and communication. We have a fantastic data system that we can utilize to help us make evidence-based decisions and then follow up on measurements. Our willingness to grow as a district. And we are able to see our opportunities to change as a positive. Some of the threats that we saw to our ability to create these goals and move forward was our finite budget, our staff turnover, and our communication. Does that bring back bells to you guys?
It does, but I'm going to correct myself again. Only the presentation is up, not any of the stuff that you just listed.
Right.
But it would be really great if we had that somewhere so that later we could reflect on it again. Mm-hmm. So that, the community could see it, so that they could give us feedback.
Mm-hmm. So The first thing that I want to talk about, so I did kind of come up with some goals based on the conversation that we had, and they're just my ideas. They're not set in stone, so we can get to them in a little bit. But wanted to have a bit of a discussion about what you guys felt the distinctions were between inputs, outputs, and outcomes that matter in regards to goal setting and measurements. So how are we going to know when we're doing well?
I would love to see us be a little stricter, more firm about setting dates that we expect to see something done and then following up on those dates. I know that there's obviously a lot going on all the time. I know it's really hard for anyone to keep track of all of it, but I do feel like sometimes we'll sit there and say like, okay, we're gonna approach this later, and then it kind of gets swept under the rug because we have 50,000 other things that pop up. So
Right.
just a better system of setting what date we will check in to determine if anything has moved forward on things.
I think that's definitely when we're adding in measurements and what kind of data do we want to see, or what are the outcomes, is when do we see them? When are we going to readdress this? So I think that that's a good part of coming up with measurable responses. Anyone else? Ms. Daniels-Williams?
I definitely agree with Christina with strong dates, but I was wondering if we could have any of the numbers brought to the full board. Because we have talked about it before and we haven't had updates. I know that things have changed in the last 2 years, and like we've talked over it a couple different times, but just seeing how they're doing, seeing maybe reports from the teachers, making them more involved in telling us, well, this fourth grade class, this third grade class, are doing this. And they're doing exceptionally well, instead of just at a presentation for a line item.
So more input from the teachers when we are giving.
The teachers and, yeah, definitely.
Okay. I would hate to put more on teachers' plate, so I'm wondering if there's a data set that we could pull that would take one. I hate adding, like telling a fourth grade teacher, here's one more thing you have to do.
And not making it a requirement, but if there's something special that they want to brag about, like when we did the presentations here, they were so happy to tell us about how they were doing with this, that, and the other in the classroom with the CKLA, and how it's going straight this way, and how all the things are working together. Just different things that they might be, that they could have an engagement in showing off how great they're doing. Like not a mandatory requirement, you have to show up on Tuesday. But if you have something spectacular going on in your classroom, or the kids are doing something that they want to show, they can even just send a video. They don't have to physically show.
Yeah, brag moments.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it goes along with what Dr. Andre was saying, that we like to have the kids show off what they're doing and show to their parents what they're doing. And I mean, why not show it to the community,
Do you have ideas on how we can accomplish that?
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to our goals, right? So at the CIA subcommittees, we have the high school, middle school, and elementaries who are presenting data. So I think where we're looking at our board goals, what are those quarterly KPIs that we're reporting out on? And distinguish between, I think, where this question goes, with inputs and outputs. So whether it's the finance and ops, but how is the board looking at academic return on investment through what we're spending money on, right? So what are those indicators through student achievement data is one factor, and what do we, like, how do we report out on that? And then there's other moments that it might be brag moments, right? And so there's two different conversations that might be happening. So that's why I think we want to distinguish, is it It's great to have all the celebrations, and I would love to have that all the time. But at the same time, where the board is asking, how do we know we're making progress? And those are different indicators. So that's where through this goal setting, how does the board know that we're making academic progress? What are those key inputs or outputs that you would want to see? Monday night, next Monday night coming up, we're having middle school data that's being presented. And that's a comparison over 5 years, but is that a meeting that's at the CIA meeting, or is that a workshop meeting and talking about it? And so I think that's what we want to tease out tonight on what's brag moments, and then what are those KPIs that we're setting as board goals, that it's two different kind of conversations.
Ms. Raymond?
I think the answer is kind of both, right? Historically, when the board was getting this kind of data and having these conversations, it would start at the curriculum committee meeting, right? But then the materials would come from curriculum to the full board, just like the policy materials, just like the materials for finance. Even if there wasn't a vote, that data would be included in the packet so that the board didn't have to go like digging for it. And then the curriculum chair could say, hey, at our last meeting, we discussed this. People had an opportunity at the wider board meeting to ask questions for clarification. And then it also gives the public the opportunity to have public comments, because now it's incorporated in the agenda. And then, I think we've talked about before, going back to that process of having like with 2 meetings a month, and one has a presentation and one is like more business. And so then you have that opportunity of the monthly presentation. Is it something informational for the board? Is it a presentation about something that we're working on, like redistricting or whatever? Or is it a presentation because the kids at Lead Street are learning about, mechanics and they want to come show us their experiments? So I think the answer is we want both. But, for me, it's hard when we're asked to, like, I would like to see, like Ms. Daniels-Williams said, some more information about student performance so that we can have really robust conversations about if the initiatives that we've approved are having an impact, and whether that impact is good or bad. I'd like to see some of the Ed Council stuff come back to us so that we can hear, because that's already a built-in way for the teachers to talk to their union reps and bring that to the board's attention. I'd like to see that presented here so that we can have those robust conversations about, well, we approved this, but maybe it's not working the way we had hoped. And is there a change at the board level, or do we ride it out? You know what I mean? Is there a change that the staff has suggested? Because I would rather have, I just feel like we've been heavy-handed since COVID without a lot of follow-up, and I don't like it.
Well, we have Ed Council tomorrow. So,
In the past, the Ed Council reps reported to
Yeah.
the board.
Yeah, I think we should do that at the next meeting. Since we have Ed Council tomorrow, we can present that at the next board meeting.
perfect.
But I think some of these things get overlooked when they're not incorporated in the agenda and they're not part of the packet. Our packets have gotten lean, which is a good thing, but now that we're not printing out, it used to be like a dozen packets, like there's opportunity to have some informational stuff in there, not just voting stuff. Does that make sense? Because then I can find the information later that I need to drive some of the decisions we're being asked to make.
Did you have something that you wanted to add?
Well, I think there's an aspect, again, where what is informational and what is timely, right? And what's relevant and connected to the BOE goals, right? Because there's some things that are just, things happen and it's, hey, FYI. But again, how do we spur the conversation to what's the guardrails, right? What's always in the informational packet? Like, say, if we have the 4 goals that we identified last time, just around academic achievement, what does that mean? There's a lot of information on what's academic achievement. And so is it quarterly reports around at the elementary level around reading scores that comes out 3 times a year. It's beginning of the year, mid-year, end of year data around reading. Or is it around math scores? So again, like the more specific we want to be on that return on the investment, gives us a framework on these are the reports that you should be expecting at certain times, and that's the return on the investment or some of the brags, right? And that helps the administration prepare those reports so that it's, or if we're looking at fiscal management, that came up in the last kind of conversation. What does it mean as a board to be fiscally responsible? That's a lot, right? So again, how do you put something in the packet that shows that we're meeting the goals as a board on fiscal responsibility? We have the F&O meeting and that's our spending, but being more proactive in those conversations, what is the information that goes into the packet? So these are the conversations here where, again, this is our second meeting. I was almost using this as a workshop to get clearer in our goals so that we can improve going forward, because I think we should have one business meeting and one workshop so that we can have these conversations and go a little deeper. But that's where, I think for us to be on the same page, that's part of the communication on how do we set the expectations of what's going to be in the packet consistently based on the 3 or 4 goals that we could be like, this is what we did, it's our scorecard over the course of the month. Here's the data. I know in the past we looked at class sizes or enrollment numbers on a monthly basis. That's something that, it's one data point, not the only data point, but that's where the clearer we can get in around academic achievement, or what are we looking on fiscal management, or communications. I'm trying to think of the other ones that we talked about last time. There was an increased focus on special education. What data would we want to see on special education or equity among schools? What data would we want to see on a monthly basis over time? And then that's a clear thing on a monthly packet that we could be diving deeper into, but that's the consistency and say, this is what I expect. And there might be other updates that are one-offs.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
So I'm wondering if there are natural times to do some of this reporting, right? Like iReady, for example, comes out 3 times a year. So one would expect that the iReady would be happening, and then, teachers and administrators would review that, and then there might be a natural time for that to come. When we're talking about class sizes and enrollment, we report to the state in October, right? Or the end of October, I forget.
We're doing it now. Yep.
They finally decide to give us the real numbers in December. So it seems like there might be, instead of saying we're going to do this every month, there might be natural times that align with testing or data that is already being submitted elsewhere, so that your staff isn't having to create extra work at an inconvenient time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think those are some of the strong dates that we can start jumping off of, which is the iReadies. The APs are at the end of the year, but I think those would be natural.
But at the end of, the trimester comes out, right? The trimester ends, and so you have some data about, well, how did our kids do? Was there evidence of learning loss over the summer? Was there, I don't know what the questions we would ask are, but that kind of stuff. Or is that not a helpful data point from an administrative point of view, and maybe some education to us about what is helpful? You know what I mean? Because I think the beauty of a school board is that we're just regular folks.
Exactly, and we get a lot of education from you. When you're looking at a strong school district with your academic hat on, when you see a strong school district, what are the key points that you see and you go, oh, just looking at the paper, this is a school district that's meeting equity, being fiscally responsible, and the kids are showing growth over time?
So I'm looking at Tier 1 instruction and systems that support it. So what is their RTI or their MTS system? So those...
Can you use real words?
No. We use acronyms so much that I forget what they stand for. So I would look at Tier 1, which is our a curriculum that we would see in every classroom. What's our ELA curriculum? What's our math curriculum? Elementary, we call it Eureka Math. That's, but, or it's, our ELA, we're using CKLA, or, so that's just grade level systems. And we would want to see what's the overall percentage of students who are meeting proficiency in that level. That's always a strong indicator on if the system's moving forward. And then from there, we would look at, again, a systems approach around where I want to see what's their data system. Are they looking at long-term data systems, which might be your SAS or your AP scores, which comes out once a year? What's your mid-level or mid-level data that might be a couple times a year? Your iReady data comes out 3 times a year. And then I would look at your short-term data, which is your street-level data. What's the data that you're getting on a weekly basis? So I would look at a system that that's effective, or what is a good data system. Sometimes AP scores or SAS scores, you have a bad day, you have a good day, is really not reflective. And then in your mid-level, mid-cycle data, it's 3 times a year, which is good and bad. But really the importance is what happens in between, right? Is there growth in between, and what are those moves that we're doing to get the growth? So that would be really important. I would also look at curriculum systems. Are we using all canned curriculums, or are we relying, and this is a balance on where we go, but if we're relying on teacher expertise, and I was in a meeting with Mr. Hoffman this afternoon, the old language we haven't talked about is like, what's the DOK, what are the standards, and to really rely on teacher empowerment and teachers teaching to the standards and a high level of DOK, as opposed to an over-reliance on a resource, right? Resources come and go every 5 years.
Right.
The Common Core, good, bad, or indifferent, have been here since 2010. So the standards have been consistent, and that's what the rigor that we should be teaching to, instead of a resource. So I think we would look at a system on, again, how are we empowering teachers to teach to the standards, and are we giving them the right resource? I would look at our assessment system. Again, how are we measuring what we want all students to know and be able to do? And the most important data, again, is our street level data. How do we know that a student is being successful today? Not waiting for SAS scores, not waiting for iReady quarterly scores, but how do we know that little Mario is going home as a successful student this afternoon? And that's the urgency behind it. So those are the things that I would be looking for in a system. And then the last one is really about climate and culture. And there's an aspect from a student's lens. The students have empowerment and agency to own the learning, to be part of the problem solving, to be part of that culture, where it's a student-led environment or a student-centered environment. And I think that's where a lot of successful schools or districts are moving to, where it's not adult heavy controlled, and about, I put air quotes, about making sure you follow all the rules. If the kids own the rules and they have a voice in it, then it's a stronger system. So those are the systems that I would be looking at. And it's hard on paper sometimes, but those are the systems that we have to put in place to be really successful. Answer your question?
It does, and it's kind of guiding my, kind of how I see these natural data points is with student success and achievement, obviously we would pull out the data to show that we, what's going well. And we're gonna sell our district to show like, this is where we're strongest. Our math curriculum is above and beyond for everybody else in the state of New Hampshire. Like, we can easily pull those things out to sell it. And I think that that's probably something that we should focus on when we're talking about student achievement goals. But for climate and culture, I think one of the data points that we can look at is there a reduction in disciplinary? You know, I'm sure there are a lot of other little data points, but that's the one that comes to mind is there a decrease in discipline? But also, and this is just from an adult, are you happy in your job? Like, are people calling out less? Are there less unplanned sick days as opposed to planned days off? Like, to me, that's how I gauge when I'm at work, like, oh, everyone's calling out this week. And then you're like, oh, right, that person's in charge. They don't like that person. They're not going to be here. So that's an easy way of measuring the adult satisfaction, which plays into student satisfaction. Because if you're not happy at your job, you're not filling other people's baskets. Mr. Johnson?
On building on that is one of the things we mentioned at that meeting was also hearing from students. You know, what do the students feel in the school environment? Are they getting the most out of it? When they reach that senior year, it'd be interesting to hear back on, you know, what the students themselves felt that worked and didn't work throughout their whole time in the Nashua school system.
Yeah, I think I shared with you guys last time, just the shift from public school to college and then being able to do at the end of the semester, the teacher feedback. And I was like, oh, my voice matters. Like, that was a huge shift for me in owning my education, was like, I can give feedback and somebody's listening to it. It's not just like being on a conveyor belt and being pushed through. Obviously, school is not the same as it was, 5 years ago when I left it. There have been shifts in practice, but I think when kids have that ability to give feedback and we listen to them, I think that increases their buy-in.
I wish Mr. Maris and Mr. Farley were here, because I would love to see our student reps develop some sort of exit interview process. You know what I mean? For when you leave middle school and when you are close to the end of high school.
Well, I think,
because that's a good way for us to grow.
yeah, and I think that's, I personally would like that. I don't know if all the students would buy into that. But.
I wouldn't make it mandatory. I don't think you make stuff like that mandatory.
No, answer this or else never gets anyone anywhere. Ms. Daniels-Williams?
So I guess listening to everything that Dr. Andre just presented, those are things that are great to hear about, and those are great for the district. But your question was a hypothetical. What would you want to present? And I guess I just wanted to bring it back to the board is asking, or Shawanda, my part is asking for the strong dates and any data, because we haven't had any. So I just want to bring it back to that. I love everything that Dr. Andre said, that this is what would be excellent in a school district. This is what I would like to talk about. I would like to talk about the Tier 1 and all the CIA and all these different acronyms and stuff like that. And I say, that sounds great, but we haven't heard any. So when can we decide to hear some of it? You know, when any, Ms. Raymond mentioned just the enrollment dates, just, I want to make sure that we are in this work group and that we actually come out with something actually that we are going to work and that we're going to produce for the community. Because it sounds nice to say that these would be great things, but can we have those? And I understand that we're going to set dates according to the dates that are going to come up over the year. But how about just talking about, we haven't had any dates for the last 2 years. So is there anything that we can have that is past? Because you said we'll go skip forward to 5 years. I just want to make sure that we're getting some of the numbers, that we're seeing that our kids are being strong and striving through these new curriculums and these new changes, that the decisions that we're making up here are productive.
Yeah, so again, I just want clarification, because there's so much data that I don't want a shotgun approach. We're doing enrollment data one time, we're doing math data. Again, I think just that clarity in, a lot of the presentations on how things were working and not working was at the curriculum level. So it was in subcommittee and not at the full board, so whether it's the reports. So again, I think there's an aspect on just what are those guardrail, common expectations, things that we're going to have on an ongoing basis, because a lot of it is a report that we can, print out, but is that going to be a conversation? So again, if there's certain data that the board wants, again, I think we just need to have a common understanding, common expectations on what is the information you need to make decisions, because it could be so much. I mean, when we have conversations in some of our subgroups, like list all the data that we collect, and it's pages and pages and pages long. But if it's not the real data to make a decision, then it's a different conversation. One piece of data I collect, how many students come to school more than 85% of the time and fail classes? So we usually have the conversation on, give me how many students are not coming to school.
Right.
Okay, we have students coming to school and failing. We don't have a conversation, like that's not a flag. Like that's a bigger conversation. If you're not coming to school and it's a truancy issue, that's a whole different level of intervention. But if you come to school every day and you're failing classes, that should be a bigger red flag.
Right.
So again, what do we do with the data? What are we collecting? Because sometimes, in the past, I know the district would give attendance data, and it was the amount of kids who are missing more than 10% of school. I would expect those kids to fail or whatever, right? And like that's a common thing, and that's a different intervention than kids who are coming all the time and slipping through the cracks. Right. So again, this is where let's narrow the data that we want to have conversations on, and then what are those goals? Again, as Ms. Bishop started, what's the difference between inputs, outputs, and the outcomes? And those are different data sources.
So to me, I think it's a conversation about levels of data, right? Unless as you're running those things, you find that we have a significant cohort of kids who are coming and failing, then it becomes a district level, board level problem where we need to problem solve. But if it's a few kids here or there, that's kind of, I'm going to say social working, but that's not the right word. That's an individual intervention that needs to be done at the building level and down to each individual classroom level. And so I don't personally want to be overwhelmed with individual data, right? I don't want to be, I don't want to get reams of classroom data either, because it's not about, how's Mrs. Smith doing versus Mr. Jones. That's not really what I care about. What I care about is how are our third graders across the district in every classroom doing as far as, reading on grade level?
Yep.
And are there differences in approaches that the district has identified of things that are working better or things that need support that we can, maybe spend some money investing in? Like this school has higher reading data because they went to this great training, and so we would like to have this coach come and go to the other schools, right? Like that's the kind of stuff I want to know, not, again, not Mrs. Smith is, has better reading scores. I think that varies from year to year and student to student, and it's not helpful.
So there's the data. So we can look, let's just take third grade reading scores. We have third grade reading scores at the beginning of the year and then, the end of the year.
But I want to see
At
that
some point-
they're growing.
So there's a growth, but if there's like a huge shift in one area, that's where we have the presentation. Like what happened at New Searles that their reading scores jumped up a significant percentage? Tell us about it. What did you do? Was it a professional development? Was it a new curriculum? Was it, what kind of buy-in happened in the classroom? That's where the presentation can happen.
Right.
And then, so I think I tapped my nose because you hit it right on. The whole point of this is for us to be able to hear data, and then what are the board policy shifts that we need to create to ensure that this change continues to happen, or if we're going down a path that we don't want to go down, what interventions do we need? So it really does guide policy.
Right.
So what do you, like, especially from a policy committee chair, like, when you start hearing, what are the red flags for you that, oh, the board needs to intervene?
So for me, some of the data that I'm interested in is stuff like when it comes to test scores, how are we doing globally, like on a grade level view, not a classroom view, not an individual.
Because our policies have to affect the entire district, not school by school.
How are we doing on discipline? I get a lot of anecdotal things. Like last month, unfortunately, I had COVID, so I missed it. But last month, I asked policy to talk about where you can find the cell phone policies for grade level, right? And so Mr. Posca and the policy team had a great, robust conversation about what is our cell phone practices, because it's not a big P policy, and do we need a district-wide policy on it? Because I hear anecdotal data from individuals who find that the handbook isn't helping them with their classroom management. But then I also hear from parents who really want their kid to have the cell phone, and then we hear from people who their child's IEP requires them to have an assistive device of some sort. So there was a whole range. So for me, it's, we have all this stuff. How do we make it make sense? And is this a district level change? When we're talking about piggybacking off of cell phones, if we're talking about discipline, a few years ago, we were looking, pre-COVID, we were looking at the discipline data because it appeared that there were a lot more suspensions happening, right? And we were concerned at a district level about the amount of class time that kids were missing. And then we had some ESSER funds, and we did the out of school suspension. And I think that worked, but we've lost the funding. So now I kind of don't want to know. But I do want to know, right? Like, did that intervention?
Well, was it a worthy investment if it was a grant-funded program that showed a significant amount of
Should we go
academic success? Is that a worthy investment? And then we're going into the fiscal responsibility. Like, should we be investing in programs that?
Right. And part of it is the numbers, right? How many kids were suspended? Are there concerning demographic trends on which kids get suspended? Like, is there a socioeconomic or a racial component? But also the anecdotal data of, after that program, were they able to reintegrate into their classrooms in a way that
Was meaningful.
that was meaningful and less disruptive than previously, right? Because if we're going to invest in this, I want it also to work for our staff, so that when kids are reintegrated, staff feel that they're supported in this process.
So maybe one of the
And students and parents, right?
Right. Maybe one of the data points that we need are also, I think we know a lot of stuff that's going on in the schools, but we don't know every single program that's happening. So maybe just an overview of all of the different programs that we have.
Right.
And then when we're not doing the systems level data, when we're getting the more concrete program level data, we can show growth in that. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, because you need the context, right? Like, you can tell me, like, listen, we had 72 kids suspended last year, and that is completely meaningless to me, unless I know how it compared to the year before, or unless I know, why were they suspended? Do we have a problem with, weapons, or do we have a problem with kids getting suspended because of attitudes? Do we have what is the data showing us of what the trigger was, so that we can,
Create an intervention.
Yeah.
Right.
The social worker in me is like, well, what should we do? Do we restorative justice? Do we do? So that's the kind of stuff that I want to know. Like, I want to know how our kids are doing, but also how our staff are doing, and what professional development investments we need to be making for our staff, so that they feel like they're getting the tools that they need. And then, of course, me and class sizes. I want to know, at least once a year where the class sizes are? And is that working with the number of para educators that we have?
Right.
Because I hear it's not, I hear it is, I hear all sorts of stuff, and that's not, yeah. Inconsistencies are difficult.
So one of the things that they talk about in the book is student outcomes versus adult outcomes. And the adult outcomes are really what's interesting about being elected officials within a school board is we run on a platform of kind of popular ideas that don't necessarily translate into the school. So one of the things that the book was outlining is that we're focusing on things that got us elected, but they're not necessarily the things that actually increase student achievement. And being able to tease out those two is really important. So what do you guys, give me some feedback on what you think would be a different adult outcome versus a student outcome. So,
An adult outcome would be something.
Mike, sorry, I'm like signing at you.
It worked. So an adult outcome to me would be, in a budgeting class I took when they were talking about closing schools, they said that oftentimes closing a school can be more student-centered, even if it leads to things like job loss, because that money can then be redirected into areas that would then lead to student achievement, is my understanding of it, right? Okay.
Right. So I think we may not be able to answer that right now. That is kind of a thinking question because they are, and that's the hard part about being an elected official, is when it actually comes to the board, like a lot of the stuff that we talk about, like book banning, is that actually happening in our school? No, because we're the ones in charge of that. It's not happening. But it was something that was definitely brought up during election time. So we kind of naturally feel like we have to keep addressing it. But is it really something that's happening that we need to focus policy on?
I just want to put the plug out there to anyone who's watching this, that we have a policy. We have actually multiple policies.
Yeah, the library.
Yeah, but that have been on the books since the 70s about if someone doesn't, you can always opt your kid out, but if you also have problems with other materials, there's a policy for that.
Right, but I think when we're looking at like currently right now, there's a shift in what people want in and out of the schools, and it really hasn't trickled its way into our district on like a broad level. So is it something that we need to focus about in board meetings, or do we have to wait until it becomes a problem?
And I don't even think, I can't remember a time I've had a parent come up to me and say, well, maybe one, but book banning, like it's not an issue that's at the forefront of the community that we work with.
Right. But if we had somebody who, let's say, because we don't really have anybody on this board who's for book banning, if we had one adult who was just sitting here like, we have to get rid of this one category of books, is that their own personal driving issue, or is that a student outcome issue? So being able to sit on the board and being able to tease out those things ourselves will increase our ability to match the student outcomes. And that's kind of a bigger level. Christine, Ms. Darling.
So first of all, I think we should all make campaigns where we decide to say we want to ban the books that we really want the students to read, because every group out there will go buy the books for the students and hand them out. So I think we should contact Moms of Liberty, I believe, does it, and we should let them know that we are now banning, what textbooks do we have?
So I don't want to get in the weeds about book banning. That's not something that I was giving that as an example.
Yes. Moving on to the serious thing that I was going to say.
Yes.
I know that a lot of the times that I get contacted by individuals, first of all, it's usually parents. And most of the time it's parents that are, the changes that they want to see happen that would benefit them are things like no walking schools, having bus transportation for all kids, because that way the parent doesn't have to worry about transporting to and from. But that's still, there's no way to like actually fight for that. But one thing that got brought up a lot during my campaign was boys and girls bathrooms and girls and boys bathrooms. That still gets brought up, but I hope to God this board never even considers wasting the time on it, because we all know that it is not the debate that it is made to be online.
So what do you think that we can do as a board to have our strengths work more with student outcomes? Because we just kind of focused a lot on negatives, but what do you think it is as a board that we have that are strengths that can make our district better?
We agree with the professionals. We look pretty while doing it.
Ms. Daniels-Williams?
And I think that we strengthen our community presence and make it more easier for the community to not only reach the board, but ask for things that pertain to their schools and their environment. I think that one of the things that we all agreed on when we did it is the community. We want to make sure that we're making ourselves accessible to the community, making the schools accessible to the community. And I know that we are, and we do things, but increasing that, making a better effort in that as a goal for this year or the years to come, you know? And I think that maybe we'll get to hear what the community wants and needs. I hear a lot of talk about, well, this change in this community would be great, or we need more participation from this community. And I just want to see if us as a board can see if we can close that gap instead of putting it out to someone else, and seeing how we as a district can reach out to the community and make it better and more feasible for them to address us, ask for things, and that even would work with the teachers. They have a union, and every school has a PTO or something like that. Like, you know what I mean? I'm not sure exactly how it would play out, but I just think that is important, because a lot of the community members that I meet, they don't know exactly what we do. You know, they might have seen some of us run, or they might have seen some of us show up to an event in their community, but not know what they could ask or suggest or request or any of that. So how do we address that as a board?
So jumping ahead, you're kind of talking about how the school boards ensure they accurately represent the community's vision and values. So that's part of what our board does, is share that. And being, give me an example of how we can be more out in the community.
I know that we had talked about, we get invitations to different things, and we go, maybe, we can't all go together, but just different things, making sure that the community knows that they can invite us to things, make sure the community knows that they can send emails other than just negative emails. Like, I had a thought that this might work great in a third grade class. I have a second grader and they're struggling in this or whatever, just making sure that they know. I know that we talked last week, last time we were together, about getting cards so that when we see people in the community, just making us more accessible. I just want to, I'm not sure what the whole answer is. I just want to make sure that as a board, we work on that. If it's agreeable to all of us,
I think you make a good point. I think Ms. Daniels-Williams makes a good point. I think COVID changed things for a lot of people. Prior to that, it was not unusual for school board members to be invited to do read to the second grade classroom. It's guest reader week. And it wasn't, it was common for board members to be at sporting events or going to the plays or going to the concerts. And I think those of us who are parents are at the things that our kids are doing. But I'm thinking of Mrs. Oden, who was like my idol as a school board member, because she still goes to all the football games. And Miss Van Twyver, who was on the board when I first got here, always went to every play. Like, she enjoyed them. And I think it's nice for the community to see us out and about. And I think that's part of the responsibility of the role that, isn't really talked about. So I think that's important.
Us as a positive, one of the things that's definitely helped is the EDU emails, because I'm getting a lot more correspondence with people than my old Rob for BOE email. Like, that's, it's a lot more correspondence with parents and getting a lot more information through that.
Right. And we do have a policy about, when people email us or reach out to us on how we're supposed to handle that, right? Like, we send them to the appropriate person in the district, and if we don't know, we send them to Dr. Andrade. But I think that community members appreciate that when you can say, oh, you know what, I'm happy to forward your email to the school principal. Or was it last year or the year before, we had a community member reach out who had an idea for enhancing some of the culinary program. She does a Taste of Africa, and she runs a store, and she does all these great things. And it was really cool to be able to connect her with the CTE director and to facilitate getting some of her ideas in there, which I think the more we can do that, the better.
So how would we, as a school board, identify and define the community's core values?
Are you talking about doing another strategic plan where we have focus groups?
No, I think when we're coming back to the board, and when we're doing policy shifts, or if we know the data that we want to see, how do we know that we're not reflecting our own wants, but we're reflecting the community's wants? How are you guys getting your input from people, but also how are we sharing it at the board level in order to facilitate change? Ms. Daniels-Williams?
I think that just asking them, or if they approach us in any way, we send them either to you or Dr. Andre. You know what I mean? They need to know that they will be heard, or that they can be heard. Just everything that was said. Like Rob said, now that we have emails, maybe they'll start using them more. And things that go to the full board, sometimes they're positive or negative, making sure that they know that that's even an option. They don't know, and some people don't know and are frustrated by situations like transportation, like the things that go on with their kids in classes, or the hiring process, or whatever. But how do we get it to the community that we are a community district, that all you have to do is reach out to Dr. Andre. He will return within a week or 48 hours, however it works, or however the process is once it leaves our EDU emails. Even just that, showing up in the community, maybe someone will come up and say, my kid's having a hard time in school. Is there any services for that? Yes, we have counselors and social workers. Let me give you the number to the district, and then they handle it from there, not handling it ourselves. You know what I'm saying? How do we build those bridges bigger and better? That was one of the things, when we took away just having more open houses, maybe having more access to the buildings in the communities. For us, letting them know that you can come to a Board of Education meeting, that they are standardly every other Monday. The schedule is posted online. Please come, please talk, please.
But how do we bring in, so when I think of a value, I think of like, the values that I want to impart on my children as they grow up is that, they're hardworking, that they're happy, that they're content, that they're well-rounded. When I'm talking about what are we representing the community's values in our student outcomes, how do we know what those values are? How do we know what the majority of our community wants to see in their child's or in any student's education? So not just like the one-offs with like, what does my student need, but what do we want to see our students graduate with to become what I keep saying is adults that they're proud of? So, Ms. Starling.
I've always just kind of been under the impression that it's up to each one of us to cultivate our relationships within our community. I know I've seen Miss Giglio at quite a few events. In fact, I think she does still actually read at Mount Pleasant, right? Yeah. I believe Broad Street. There we go. And I know this is, I think, the first year that I haven't gone to Dr. Crisp to read yet, and that's just because I have not had 5 minutes to do anything. But like a lot of that is because I go to every event at the Arlington Community Center, and I do a lot of events through NeighborWorks, which are done all throughout like the tree streets up to Marshall Street. So at one point I was even doing office hours at the library once a month, but that even just once a month, that's a lot, and people are angry in person.
So I think one thing that we've learned over the years is that if there's something really controversial that we're facing, people tend to come for public comments, but not the first time it's on the agenda. Because our agendas we no longer have like a paper or a way to get the information out. And so I think I don't necessarily want to change our policy and have agendas come out earlier, but I do think that one of our goals was communication, and I think having a more, accessible way of the community finding out what the topics are so that they know that they want to come could be helpful. I have no helpful thoughts on how to make that happen. So don't.
Almost like a school board newsletter.
I think we'll see some of that when the administration gets a communication person, that I think we'll see some of those changes that we're discussing here, that we're, from what we've heard about that position, that it'll be somebody who will get more of the word out to, to the community that we can then respond to. I was going to say that a lot of what we get is reactionary, like transportation. Nobody had a problem with transportation until
there was a problem.
There was a problem. So, that's one of the issues is, how do we even, we wouldn't really know the transportation would be an issue until it became an issue. And then it's something that we then have to address going forward. But right now we're dealing with reactionary, it's transportation, it's Stellos. Those are the two big things that people are reacting to.
Right now.
And now we have to realize, okay, going forward, how do we make sure that that issue is addressed so we don't have that concern later on?
So I think Dr. Andre can speak.
Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead.
I can speak.
I think you can speak. I'll allow you. You can 4 minutes.
So I think there's an aspect, it's a very provocative kind of question, again, just to level the conversation. And so it kind of goes back to the first question of like, what's the board goals, right? And so what are we being proactive with our community with? And how do we get that input, right? Because from the community, we want to make sure our goals reflect the values and the input for the community. So as Mr. Johnson just said, it's how are we more proactive than reactive? Instead of people coming to us, what does it look like when we're taking proactive steps to make sure, and we will be going out for an RFP pretty soon for strategic planning that get more voice in, but that should be all the time. but do we have a solid base on where does the community want to be in 2035? What are the schools, what does the community want our pathways to look like? So I think that's the aspect on, are we making decisions around our board goals, those guardrails, because things will come up around transportation, Stellos, or I don't like this. Those are different conversations. Those are one-offs. But how are we staying on message saying this is where we see our school district in 2030? And how do we get there? And that's the proactivity or being proactive in making sure that the conversations we're having here is that we always have a pulse on the community values. There's an aspect, it comes from the administration, and there's also an aspect on what is the board's goals and responsibilities on making sure that decisions and there's enough input that your decisions are matching core values. And we have to be careful sometimes where, we were changing some policies around GPAs and, we hear from a small group of people and not everybody, just the people who show up. Sometimes we don't hear from other aspects of it. So again, I think these are conversations that guide our work kind of going forward. There's, as Ms. Raymond said, it's like, we're not going to have all the answers tonight, but really, I think around the research around effective school boards is what are our guardrails? What do we want to collect? What are those 4 or 5 consistent things that we're always reporting out on and staying on message? So it just keeps us focused on the student achievement, moving systems, and then our policies and our finances matching those goals. And, right now we're kind of still shotgunning things. And so how do we, I wrote down, we have November, December, January, February, March, April, and May, and the school year's over. There's not a lot of meetings that we have in these workshops, and we might have budget kind of conversations. So again, how do we hone in on what information do we need that we're having these workshop meetings? And so it's relevant, it's timely, you're getting the information, we're going deeper into those things, as opposed to it's a static dashboard that I'm giving you on a monthly basis. Here's our attendance, class size, right? And that's static data, right? So that's different, right? And so we're saying, like, when are we going deeper into it? So those are the things that, how do I meet your needs? How am I successful? What are we putting out there? And then in these 8 workshops that we have left, where are we going deeper? But we need those guardrails that, again, those consistent things. And because there are going to be things when we go to a play or a soccer game, people are going to come up and, hey, here's an instance, and you're like, talk to the building principal, talk to the superintendent. That's a different level as opposed to a board. In 3 years, this is where we see our district, right? And those are, again, those guardrails, those overarching systems that we're moving. And I think that's where, deeper kind of conversations.
So just as an example, let's say we've listened to the community, we've clearly identified, what the value system is, and as a board, and this, again, as an example, we have decided as a board to make Nashua have the most robust CTE program in the state. But as an example, if that's our goal, right, is to have the most robust system, then our fiscal responsibility would go towards building that up. And then the data that we would want would be focused on, like, are the kids going into the CTE programs feeling accomplished? Are they graduating with jobs? Like, then we can clearly show what kind of data. So when we're talking about, down the line, is what do we see in our schools in 10 years? And then how are we moving towards that? Not just how do we fix all of the multitude of problems that come up on an individual basis, but what are we guiding our schools into? Listening to values, listening to our community, being responsible with our monies. This obviously will be, I don't think we can have that conversation tonight, but that's really kind of where we want to be moving to, is we can keep doing the same old and fixing problems as we go, or we can develop, like, we want to have some, like, in 10 years, we want our schools to represent blah, and we need to come up with what that is. And then our goals will incrementally match those points. Does that make sense?
I think it does. But I also think that some of that is some of the values about what you get out of public education is a little bit generic, right?
Right.
We want every student in Nashua, no matter where they came from or what language they spoke when they walked into our room, our doors, we want them to leave our district having had the opportunity to discover their own interests and talents so that they can make a map for their own future. And that means making sure that they can read and do basic math, but also that they have the opportunity to take the higher level courses if that's where they're going. They have the opportunity to take career and technical education courses if that's where they want, or to make some sort of combination that fits their kind of goal and their family's goal. And I think, I know it's really general, but at the end of the day, that's what I want. And all of the other stuff kind of gets in the way of that.
Right.
So, and I think that in the past, we've done a pretty good job, like for CTE, having a director of CTE who had that vision. And I think some of that vision really has to come from staff. We had a director who said, hey, we have kids who don't love algebra, but we can develop this robot algebra program to get those kids who aren't having fun with this to really engage and enjoy it. And that is not something that, as a board member, I would ever have thought of. But when she said it and she went and did it, it was really cool.
And I 100% agree with you that that's what I envision students, is that they find their groove, their niche.
Right. So for me, I want to make sure that our district has sufficient programming available at every level so that by the time kids get into high school, that they have had that opportunity to try a bunch of different things and figure out what they like and what things they just kind of get through. And that means continuing to make sure we have like the unified arts classes at the middle schools and making sure that our science curriculum is interesting and not super boring.
Ms. Daniels-Williams?
So I totally agree with everything that Heather just said. I think that as we move forward and we're setting the goals and we're thinking about everything that we've talked about today, I think that the goals will be very important. So I love that we're thinking about this and not settling on it today. And everything that we were talking about on the last meeting and bringing it into this meeting, I think that it's good.
Mr. Johnson?
Just, again, building on what Heather said, is promoting what we offer to these kids. Like, again, the CTE, the AP courses, the vast opportunities they have, the clubs, the drama and sports, like everything we offer, we need to keep pushing that so kids know that they have those opportunities, that they can come to high school and choose things that they've never even thought of before. I mean, the amount of kids that I saw kids, especially like through like the, HVAC, like these kids are now, maybe at the beginning of high school, they weren't quite sure where they were going to be, and now they're going to become interns and make good money in trades that they never thought was even an opportunity when they were in middle school. And so we just got to keep selling the schools as like, hey, you have a vast number of opportunities of directions you can go in when you get to this level.
And that kind of, if we can go back to what Ms. Daniels-Williams said about being present in the community, if our goal is to make sure that our students know all of the different things that are available to them, is when we're out in the community, like even, did I say it in here before, like setting up a tent with like a school administrator and then a board of ed, and we've got CTE brochures. These are the AP classes, like we have that information available for when people who don't just need to come up to us and talk about the one-off with their child is, oh, we have this new brochure, check this out. And that, I think that would be a great way of making sure that everybody knew what was available. But if our goal is to make sure that the students are leaving with this, that they feel engaged and they feel that their education was worthwhile, we should be doing everything that we can to make sure that the kids are finding their space. And we do that by whatever we need to do within policy to make sure that kids have, equitable distribution of access to curriculum. And we can walk it back to how does that start? How do we ensure that starting in the elementary level? By having solid reading scores, by having, they're competent in math. So we can see if that's our goal, is that kids are leaving high school feeling autonomy and empowerment over their education. We can easily walk that back to where does that start?
And I think that because we are lay people, we need some education, I think, from the educational experts about what are the inflection points for kids needing to have this information, right? So like when I hear about kindergartners and first graders and their reading scores, part of me is like, meh, it's only first grade or kindergarten. Some kids don't read till 7. But then when we get to 3rd and 4th grade, I start to worry. But I don't know if that's a realistic or evidence-based approach, or if it is just my experience as a parent and a social worker, right? So
Right.
I think that's, as we're talking about some of the data, as we're like looking at iReady or whatever a couple times per year, to know, is there any robust research that says, if our reading scores are low at kindergarten, that's not a problem because kindergarten should be play-based, right? Or, but if they're low at 4th grade, now we need to look at building some supports in there.
Well, I think what we need as, and I never want to ever think that we know more than administration, because we absolutely do not. But we do need to know the questions that we need to be asking. So I think maybe one of the professional developments that we can focus on are, what are good numbers? So if 80% of first graders are testing at, 75% proficiency in language, is that good? Because if you say it with a smile and a banner, oh, great, that's amazing. But if we're like, that's actually indicative of like a whole group of kids who are not getting their needs met, like how you present that information matters. So maybe we can look into educating us about, does that make?
Well, yeah, it goes back to the acronym SOUP that I was earlier, right? It's about,
Like SOUP, students, opportunity.
so, when I mentioned what is tier 1, right?
Right.
So tier 1, we would want to see 80% of the students, meeting grade level expectations. And then I mentioned RTI, which was response to intervention. And so then you get into a pyramid. So if we would like to see 80 to 85 of the students being successful, and then you have another 10% who are tier 2, and then a bottom, tier 3 being around 5%. That's the ideal.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
But what I'd want to know is if we're at, like, we want to be at 80%, we want to be at 100. So what are the interventions that we're doing for those 20%?
but is that realistic? Because, I mean, we're talking about grade level by age, and we know that child development is not like when you turn 1, all of a sudden you learn to walk that month. Like,
But it's also but it's also about the standards, right? And so the standards are written at grade level appropriateness, right? And so then it's how do you measure those standards? And in different meetings, I talked about, 4 essential questions. What do we want all kids to know and be able to do? How are we going to measure it? What are we going to do if they don't get it? And what are we going to do if they do get it, right? So how do you even differentiate up? So those are the conversations if we're talking about what are the interventions. But if you don't have a guaranteed and viable tier 1, then you're intervening on interventions.
Right.
right? And so now you never get to that higher level of expectation. So again, we can talk about and do some PD around that, whether it's in a workshop here or in the curriculum instruction meeting. I think it's good for having all the board members
rather do
here.
that with everyone.
But again, I think we just have to, again, what is the appropriateness if we were breaking down our reading scores? What do they mean, and what do like intervention plans look like? So again, I think that's just focus of where we need to go, and that goes back into the direct correlation into what's our academic goals, reading, a math goal and that aspect of it. So again, I think that's just the focus on where do we need to go and make better decisions, because as you were mentioning earlier, if we want students to have gateways to opportunity, what's the implication on policies, right? And prerequisites. So that's where things start going together and the onion starts to, unfold a little bit. So those are good conversations, but it keeps us on the guardrails on this is how we move systems. And I think it's a robust conversation tonight, and we see how complicated it is, but hopefully we can get to those 3 or 4 areas that we're just hammering home over and over again.
So I think the first thing that we need for that is, I don't think any of us have kids in well, Christina does, in elementary school, but like,
Ms. Prin,
Ms. Prin does too.
this is actually a very representative board of all the levels.
It is. All I was about to say is I don't quite remember when the iReady tests are anymore. I don't remember, boy, once you're done with that.
The window just closed 2 weeks ago, beginning of the year data.
So maybe that's something that we could build into a calendar that we can just expect is that information. And then we can kind of have some, start building our outline of what and when. So, okay, I think we have some good jumping off points. We've been talking about this for about an hour and a half now, which I think is a good time to put this to bed. I don't know if you guys want to. Ms. Daniels-Williams?
So I have just one more thing. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to need. Dr. Andre said that we only have 8 more of these sessions, but how many of them do we have before we start looking at the budget and putting that together, so that we can probably look at these numbers and this data to see what we're going to need for next year, because that's coming right up, whether it's November or, because even if we looked at the last 2 years, even though this year isn't ready, but the numbers for the last 2 years, I thought we were going to get at some point too. So like Dr. Andre said, staying within the guardrails, doing math, writing, whatever information he has or wants to give those over the last 2 years, so that we can at least have a basis and a foundation to grow off of for creating this next work meeting and going forward as we're looking at those things. Because, just the different programs, like the in-school suspension or whatever. How do we know if we actually need that? It went away with grant funding, but do we need it? Do we need to add it to the budget? Like those things, talking about all those things. And that's why I just want the data.
So I think we might actually be too far into this year to start making huge budget shifts. I think we need to have these conversations about goals, not for the next budget, but for the one after, right? I think
So we're in the prime time for setting, reviewing the data and getting our priorities ready for next year's budget.
for 2025.
Yeah, not this year. It's planning
No,
for
I know,
next year.
no, I know. We're already spent all of that.
Maybe we could do a more drawn out budget, since the mayor hasn't been looking at the budgets until June anyways. Like maybe we could have a little bit more information in the budget discussions instead of the broad overview.
Well, I think there's always going to be the stuff that we have to do in our budget that we don't have a lot of choice over. But when we're looking at where to put that extra $3 we have,
Do we have extra $3 this year? I'm under the impression we will not.
but I think we can let administration come up with that.
And then we can like test it out and see like the things that are, because like that's the thing. Like the Stella's thing. I just don't want to make sure that if it needs to be there, that we're asking for it, that as a board, we have decided that this is the things that we need to do off of the capital improvement things, and we have the time to talk about it and do it before the week before we turn it in.
Well, I think when you're talking about those big, huge line items, that's probably something that we need to assess in our goals is how do I say this? Our facilities aren't, how much do our facilities impact our student outcome, right? So that's part of the conversation is there is an element that buildings do teach our kids, but what is it within those buildings that's teaching the kids? And make sure that all of the schools have it. But really, it's the teachers that are teaching kids. It's the curriculum that's being put in front of the kids. But when we're talking about these bigger capital expenses, is overall, what is it within the facility that is having the impact on the goals for the students that we want? Do we want to be a school district that has that has the highest level of technology in every classroom? Is that something that we value? Is having kids have having access to top-notch technology? Or do we want kids to have access to the education that is provided through those faculties? So is it a computer that's going to teach the kid, or is it going to be how do we teach the kid how to use the computer properly?
Or just making sure the roofs don't leak.
Right.
You know, that's what I'm saying. Like those capital improvements, I don't want to get into that again. But the data, that's a different conversation. I was just saying, getting the data and the information on the programs that we have ran over the last couple of years, what worked, what didn't work, what went away with ESSER funds, so that we can create these goals going forward. That's all. Like I said, I just want to be clear. Like, the data will help us going forward to pick these goals so that we can know what will be a student or an adult outcome over the last 2 years. Not this year's, because I know they're not ready and everything, but the ones over the last.
So we did have the high school came in and gave their outcomes. We're having middle school next Monday. And then elementary, I'm assuming, is December?
The next month.
November.
Then we can reconvene and talk about these things.
So that'll be in curriculum, so all of that data point. And then what we could do is just have kind of a brief overview of what
Yes.
happened in curriculum, because we're not necessarily voting in C&E about things. It doesn't necessarily make its way back to the board.
Right.
So,
I'd like it to make its way back to the board, the way, like liaison report kind of thing.
right.
Or even like in the book.
This is what
they
happened
said
if you didn't have
that
time to
those things
watch it.
come to the board.
So,
Yeah.
5% of the time or whatever. You know, I read
Yeah,
the
the majority of the meeting should be focused on the outcomes.
So I just want to piggyback on what Ms. Daniels-Williams was talking about facilities, because I think that there has been significant confusion in our communities over the last, I'll say, year, about how the responsibilities and ownership of our buildings play out. Because it's different in Nashua and Manchester than it is in almost every other school district in the state. And so I think it kind of segues into the next thing on the agenda. But I do think that we need to have that conversation, because I didn't realize until I got on the board that we can't keep our money at the end of the fiscal year. Like, we don't have a secret, like, savings account.
Can't save it.
We could.
We can't, everything goes back to the city, and the city has the capital improvements fund, and the city has those funds.
But we've never sent it back. We always spend it at the end of the year on the specialties. When
No,
have-
Mr. Donovan sent back like $350,000 last year.
Yeah, we typically send back several $100,000. So if we have.
that was the JSBC thing?
No.
No, that's our budget.
So that's the kind of thing where I feel like there's not a good understanding of how that works. So, and then I have feelings about contracts that didn't get approved by the board, but I'm just gonna keep that to myself unless it comes up.
So let's wrap up the goals conversation. I have an idea of some things that we can put together the next workshop meeting. I'll send out maybe some outlines, a preliminary calendar outline, and then maybe what the next year can look like. And then, I mean, this is a different shift in how we're running our meetings, okay? So it's not, it might feel a little choppy, and I hope you guys extend me a little bit of grace in how we're shifting this. Is this how you did it in your other districts? So you can stand behind me and be like, she's so stupid.
No. No, we would, again, we would have one meeting as a workshop. And it was a presentation, whether it was a student achievement data, but it was really professional learning for this board and the community on topics that we would come up with. Again, keeping to 4 or 5 type of issues. It was half bragging and half learning. And again, I think the more that we can have consensus on what are the constant things that we're looking for, just reinforces our messaging. And, again, I don't want to call it branding, but people know, like, the board is going to be talking about student achievement, fiscal responsibility, X, Y, and Z, and then we're proactive. These are the things that we're going on, and it's just over and over again, as opposed to it's a one-off, it's X, right? And then it just seems like it's a shotgun. So again, how do we use these workshops to reinforce what we're doing and then be proactive moving forward? So I think this is a healthy conversation and really getting into more, again, when we talk about, there's a lot of people here tonight, right? But or they're watching on film, but why do I want to watch this? Right? If it's purely business meetings, right, it's just reporting out, it's new business, it's just a business meeting, and that's not always engaging or enlightening. So it's informative, but not always that inspiration of this is where we're going and providing hope for the district.
Yeah. I think we've hit a nice plateau with our boring business meetings, that I think we have the foundation and the footing to start doing the growth that's kind of been on the back burner because we've been reinventing ourselves since COVID. And so just have a little grace for me. Give me feedback, give me a phone call, emails, whatever. But really hoping to start seeing some momentum. So if we are, yes, Ms. Raymond?
I just want to say I'm glad about this because I think it increases our understanding of how the district works, right? And how education works and how we use data to drive decision-making. And I just think anything that helps us and the community understand is helpful.
So this book is great. I know Ms. Daniels-Williams and I both have read it. It is on Kindle? So at a certain point, I get really into books and I need to have them both on my phone so nobody knows that I am reading. And then I don't like to sit in my bed with my phone, so this is for the evening time. But I think it was like $7 to download it off of Amazon and have it as an electronic copy. So great on their behalf. It comes with questions and, guided discussions. So it's not the be-all, end-all to how to run a board, but at least we can all kind of come to the table with the same understanding. And then there are some really interesting, academic journal articles not BuzzFeed top 10 school district. So anyway, this will continue on. I appreciate you guys participating in this discussion. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next steps.
There is an audiobook.
Yes. Is it $7 or one credit?
It's 99 cents with membership, but
So yeah, walk and read. Okay, so let's bump up to the next item on our agenda, which is Stellos.
Yep.
Just an update on it.
Yep. So I know there's a meeting with the Board of Aldermen. This is an agenda item around the possible funding or investment in a new field. So that's going to be happening in the next couple months. But there's been a lot of chatter on how did we get to this point. So this has been an agenda item with the JSSBC. It's been on our radar for the last couple of years. But I want to really ensure the community, when we were having assessments done in the summertime, it was at fairly tolerable. I won't say it was at the optimum, like prime. It's a 13-year-old field. It was starting to fail at that point, but it wasn't at the level of disrepair it was the last couple weeks ago when we decided to shut it down. In our conversations and the research, we actually looked at how many teams are playing on that field. And, you know, when you compare it to other stadiums and other turf fields, you might have one or two soccer games, a football game. That field is under a lot of use on a daily basis between JV teams, in soccer, football, lacrosse, field hockey, summer programs. It just really got to the point it was too far gone, and it failed a safety protocol, and it really morally being responsible before a student got really hurt. I think we made the hard decision to shut it down and reschedule games. But I really want to also commend the city for their partnership over the years and investing in our schools, and then coming together and the urgency moving forward. So I know there's been a lot of pointing fingers, but I really want to, again, thank the city, the JSSBC, and all their help on how do we move forward. But at the end of the day, it was the right decision to make on the safety of the students. I believe there's a plan going forward. Well, I know there's a plan going forward. It's just things need to get approved, and then how do we go forward from there? But again, I know there's a lot of pointing fingers, but it was the right thing to do for our student safety.
Yeah, and I think we're a public school, and we drive our cars until they're held together with duct tape with the funding that we have. So I think we did a great job in maintaining that field for as long as we did. DPW was out there doing patching, doing the stuff that they needed to do. And I think we really, we rubbed those two nickels together, and now we're at a place where we need to replace it. And, the city really jumped to and helped us out and have been supportive, and looking forward to getting it replaced, but also coming up with a plan for how do we manage this stuff in the future. If we know something is 10 years old, how do we start planning 10 years beforehand to get it done? Much like when we're talking about buildings and facilities, we have capital improvement lists that happen, but how do we plan them? So this was something that I brought back up in JSSBC a couple of months ago is, how do we establish the priorities? Who establishes the priorities? And, where does the funding come from? So there hopefully will be some shifts in how we manage everything so we don't end up at critical levels again. But that's my own personal goal, but who knows? Ms. Raymond?
How many teams did you count?
So
Because it's us and BG and some clubs as well, right?
it's 3 schools, 2 clubs. The summer programs, but it was something like our fields have an average of 24 games on them a week, and that turf is supposed to be for 2 games a week.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then we do a lot, since we've started having graduations at Stellos again, the wear and tear from those cute little shoes the girls wear, the chairs, putting up the staging up there. So we are using that field to its maximum capacity.
I don't want to dig too deep into it, but I guess I'm just like everybody else. I think that we could use and I think it goes for all of our buildings, a primer on how the funding system works for these things. Like, for example, Stellos got school building aid, but DPW maintains it, Parks and Rec does the scheduling. So it feels like someone played fast and loose with school building aid, 13 years ago. But so going forward, I guess I would like some clarity, and I'll bring it up at the JSSBC as well, because the JSSBC is 5 and 5, but it's run by the aldermen. The board sends things to theirs, and then we kind of have to wait. The Board of Ed sends things, and then we kind of have to wait. And then there's also the Capital Improvements Committee, and then there was the other ad hoc committee that the city had, and I find that I no longer feel confident in my understanding of how all the boards work together or where the lines are. So, that's where I'm at. So I think, moving forward, for me, I would love a primer on how that works. And, if we send something on the agenda, over to the city, like, how does that work? And how do we work together to make sure that we're working together cooperatively as opposed to just kind of showing up and voting on the stuff that comes on the agenda at JSSBC?
Right. And I think one of the things that I realized is not everybody watches our meetings. So even though we're advocating here for things, I think I need to have a stronger presence at some of these meetings where we share what needs to happen. I mean, if there's anybody that needs to be held accountable, it's me. I should have been advocating more for the things that we needed. I was just assuming that messages were getting back and forth. So I'll take responsibility for that and take more ownership over going. And I guess it's politicking, advocating, which I hate.
No politicking.
But it's that going and calling people and schmoozing up and getting our things paid for instead of just facts and figures. So I'll be better at that.
Right. It's just interesting because I think we're such a big part of the city that people tend to forget and that we are part of the city. Oh.
Right.
And again, it's very different than every other, except for Manchester and Rochester, every other school district who are their own entity.
Right.
And to that point, I know we had a conversation 6 months ago or thereabouts. Again, what goes through the JSSBC, like what gets approved, funding aspects of it. So I think it's not a problem till it's a problem. And there's been a lot of people, this is how the system has always worked. And I think we became complacent. So it is a good time for professional development on the roles and responsibility of the JSSBC, how are the capital improvement projects funded in that aspect of it. So I think it's a really good, timely discussion. And again, I just want to reiterate in regards to Stellos, especially with the DPW, has been nothing but cooperative. They do yearly inspections on the stadium, both for the bleachers and the field. And so, there was no indication prior. So again, blame-wise, the DPW was doing everything, and it just got to that point. It's just, we got to that level. So again, I really want to thank the city and the DPW, but it is the plan going forward to make sure in 10 years from now, we're not in the same situation.
I just have one last question on that. So we have 24 games a week on a turf designed for 2 games a week. And as they're talking about replacement turf, do they make a turf that's designed for that heavy of use? Like, or are we going to find ourselves, wearing it down faster again?
So one of the things they talked about getting was a cover for it, so that when we're using it for non-athletic events, there's an extra safety measure that's in there. I don't know if they have different levels of turfs.
Right.
That's not, I know Lisa put out information, like she requested information, I don't know what it was.
But I think along the lines as we move forward, if we're going to have that many games, are we looking at not 10 years of replacement, but 8 years of replacement?
Right.
Right, as we're
Right.
talking about fiscal management and responsibility, I want to,
Or the other aspect of it is, when we're looking at scheduling, both high schools have fantastic facilities. Are we doing more games on campus as opposed to a bigger game at Stello? So those are good conversations to have, and, as we kind of move forward.
Yeah, we're extending the life of it by using the resources that we have. My question is, and I brought this up at a JSSBC meeting, is when the decisions happen for what are the priority projects, I know I got a lot of pushback when I said I wanted a seat at the table for that, because I don't know where that happens. It's not like, it's not like the aldermen are making the decisions about it, and it's not like we're sitting here making the decisions about it. We're relying on the people with the smarts to present us what are the best options. So if that's how decisions are being done, how can I advocate at some place where I don't know what that place is? So I'll figure that out.
right, and I think, we are part of the city, and I think that the school district has been very fortunate over the last couple of decades about getting, especially when it comes to safety improvements in our schools and the vestibules, and there's been a consistent investment by the taxpayers in our facilities. Like across the district, we have 19 buildings, right? And we do need, firehouses that don't have rotting floors, and, police stations and parking garages and all that stuff. So it is a bigger discussion, and I think I get siloed, absolutely, where I'm like, just schools all the time.
Right.
So.
Right, and I think that's fine for us. That's what we're supposed to do. But I think when we sit down and we're trying to understand what the decisions were, is then take off our sole Board of Ed hats and say, okay, how does this need fit into all of the other cities' needs? I mean, we have an infinite amount of problems as a city, and we have a finite amount of money. And that's just how life works. So we'll work on that, but I think, to me, blaming is saying, I see that there's a problem, but I don't want to be a part of the solution. And I would really like to be a part of the solution. So we can make some changes and
Good, I'm sorry. I didn't intend to come across as blaming. I really seek to understand.
yeah, no, I didn't think so. I just think sometimes when we get in these situations, it's where the pitchfork's directed at, and I just don't think that that's helpful or productive or solution-based, so. Mr. Johnson?
Okay. Understanding everything, and first of all, I want to thank Sean Smith for being on top of this throughout. I mean, I've gone through a lot of the old meetings, the JSSBC meetings online and everything, and Sean was always very much telling everyone in that committee that Stellos needed to be repaired, that this was going to be a safety concern. He presented us to us, and one of the first things we ever voted on as new members was his presentation on how Stellos had tested very poor, and we needed to repair it. Now, very poor does not mean it's not playable, but we knew in January the condition was very poor. In April, my son suffered a concussion from that field. That field caused his concussion. But at that time, I was not so concerned because I knew it was going forward. I knew that we had voted on it. I knew that it was in the capital improvements program. I knew that it was going to be before the JSSBC. And somewhere in there, it fell apart. And that's what we need to figure out. And this is where we're now currently reactionary, that the field needs to be fixed, but we knew that field needed to be fixed. Sean Smith knew that field needed to be fixed. There was a citizen, David Scalera, who presented in front of the Board of Aldermen in June everything that we had discussed that the field needed to be fixed. So again, it becomes the whole issue of, are we being reactionary to things? We're looking at this field and we're saying, okay, well now we have to shut it down. It needs to be fixed. We knew it needed to be fixed. And I think in the future, we need to know when that goes in front of a capital improvements committee, why it becomes a B3 level concern.
I got bumped down to a C.
Got bumped down to a C. So again, and I saw Sean Smith saying to the Board of Aldermen and to the JSSBC, this field needs to be fixed. He said if it was up to him alone, he would have made it an A priority. So again, we've reached these points where we've been saying it. We've been saying this field needs to be fixed. This field needs to be fixed. This field needs to be fixed. And now we're in a situation where, oh, this field needs to be fixed. Where did this come from? Well, we've been telling you. We've been saying this. This field needs to be fixed. Citizens have come and presented to you that this field needs to be fixed. So I appreciate that the city's finally taken the time to say, okay, we're going to get this fixed. But we have to address the issue that it was not addressed when it was being presented. And who makes that determination? Because like you said, you should have a seat there. The Board of Education should be involved in saying, well, this is really an A priority because we rely on Sean. Sean's definitely beating the drum saying this is safety, safety, safety. And it just gets pushed down the road. So I appreciate the city finally taking the time to do this, but I don't appreciate the whole surprise that this was not expected. It's in the report. It was in our vote in January. It was presented again in July, and I just feel that it's a dropped ball that shouldn't have happened. That this field should have been fixed before football season started, and it wasn't. So going forward, again, I hope we can be more ahead of the ball on these things, that we get these things done, that the city realizes that need to be done, and that things don't get kicked down until we'll take care of it next year when we're 4 years past the life expectancy of that field, or 3 or 4 years. And then if we factor in the number of teams, And in the future, we need to now know that we get this field replaced 8 years from now, that field should be replaced again. Not 9, not 10, not 11, not 12, but 8 years from now, we know the wear and tear. That field needs to be replaced, and we need to put that in action now and not in 8 years.
Yeah, I think we have a great opportunity to create a new way of managing our school's needs. I mean, even just as, an adult who has my own budget and bills, I mean, I'm not going to go buy a new car if I can't pay for the upkeep of that car. So I think that that's something that we have to look at as well is can we afford the things that we have? And if we can't, instead of waiting till it becomes an emergency and we have to shut it down, was there a way of getting ahead of that beforehand? That's part of being fiscally responsible is, Ms. Daniels-Williams?
So I was thinking, we have the year project that turns into these separate projects, is there a policy that we can put in place that make them not movable? Because I know that I had asked before, and like, depending on the need, we move it to an A, we move it to a C, we move it to a B, and it's flexible every single year. And that's how, like Mr. Johnson is saying, like, things just keep getting moved past and past. Like, how do we actually set a order of events? Because we have a 50-year plan. We have a paper that's drawn up by Sean, and he puts it out every year. He's brought it to us 3 times this year. So how do we put that in order of need so that we know that it can't be moved from A, B, and C, because that's part of what's going on here. If we said that we need it and then it got moved to C, like, how do we stop that? Because this is 13 years of the Stellos field, but we have schools that are 20 years old that haven't had this, that, and the other. So how do, like, just a universal system, and I know Heather works a lot with the policies. So how do we do that so that we can be clear and concise and they don't keep moving around, and so that certain buildings, you know, for instance, like Mount Pleasant, don't get touched, but these 5 schools get touched, or these 6 schools get touched, or that, so that we can make it clear and concise across the district. This one was built in this year. It's next on the list. It's next on the list. Or we had talked about at budget season, creating that whole plan, look at all the buildings, look at all 19, except for McCarthy, you know, look at all the buildings, including Stellos, and see what is needed. And I want to make sure that that happens. Like I said, it's very, you know, and then when it changes on that and we know that it's that serious, who goes in to fight for that? Would that be when you come in to fight for that? Like, I know that we had talked about it, and it's like, who follows up on these? Like, okay, so it got moved to C, but no, this is a #1 priority. Can you look at it again? Who asks for that again? Who brings it up? Like, someone that's supposed to do that, like you said, would that be when you come into this? Like, it goes through JB, the joint school board, and then it goes to the city, and then they say, okay, well, it's at this because we need to do A, B, and C, but then who fights for it then? Like, but for all the buildings, not just Stellos. You know what I'm saying? Like, who does that? How does it go? Like, I know that we were saying for certain things, we talk to certain people, or there's these special groups, the ad hoc committees for this and that. Like, can we set in place something to do? Because for 50 years, we've been moving around these things, and that has been my concern the whole time that we've been talking.
So I think Ms. Raymond can answer this.
Right, the short answer is we can make whatever policy we want, but it's not legally enforceable, right? So Sean, Mr. Smith, our facilities director, makes a list every year, and things move up and down the list, right? Like, you know, roofs fail, or windows fall out, or whatever. So things move up and down the list. But we are one of only 3 school districts that are dependent districts. We don't own our buildings. Like, we basically like sublet them from the city. Like, we do all we take care of all the costs, right, of the ongoing maintenance. We get $100,000 a year from the city to do that. And then this year, I think $500,000, which was a nice bump up. And so we pay our employees to do that. But we don't have the statutory authority to issue bonds or tell the city how to manage all of the city properties. So what we do is we say, hey, we have these needs, right? And then the city has committees, which I do not understand how they all work together, who prioritize it based on what else the city needs. Because the aldermen and I just learned about the capital improvements committee last year, which makes me feel really ignorant. I don't even know who sits on it. I just learned it existed. They have to look at all the projects that the whole city has. So we're just one division. We're the biggest division, but we're just one. So we cannot dictate to them that they must do this project on our timeline. We can ask them, but it's not our decision at the end of the day.
And what is the threshold for what we can afford to, you probably know this.
I don't know it.
What is and I think what Ms. Daniels-Williams is getting at is, like, what, on a day-to-day basis, what funding do we have to maintain things, and what do we need to go to the city to request for more funding about? They were very nice and gave us more in deferred maintenance, which means that we can stay on top of
Some of the things.
Some of the
some of the
things.
things, but
19
nothing in our
buildings.
school costs $500,000. Like, that's still
So
pennies.
I think the threshold, and I would have to go back and check the procedures. I think anything over $1 million goes to the JSSBC. And then Mr. Smith and his budget will say, we're doing a small project that's a couple $100,000 that's built into the budget, that's in the operating budget. But the major projects and the renovations and the major upkeep typically goes to the JSSBC or the city. So $1 million goes pretty
So
quickly.
Mr. Smith is doing things like repaving our parking lots, replacing broken refrigerators at a school, or I think we did a stove recently, switches, IT stuff, that kind of ongoing maintenance that you have to do when you live someplace or work someplace, like it's, but for the big renovation projects, that's the capital improvements committee making the priorities for the city as a whole, and then the JSSBC deciding whether or not we move forward with any particular school project. But again, the JSSBC is just asking the aldermen to vote on a bond.
So
The JSB, to vote,
And then how we spend that bond money, really, right? Like, so the aldermen approve.
Right, they oversee the project.
And there's a couple things too, where, again, what does Mr. Smith do for preventative maintenance, which is typically in the budget? And then we also have to remember we have close to $13 million in deferred maintenance already.
Needs right now.
Right, currently. And then you couple that with a 50-year plan. So there's a lot of conversations that need to happen between us and the city on how are we investing in our buildings in the future.
And, in the past, the state had a fund, school building aid, which is part of which paid for Stellos somehow. I still don't understand how that happened. But there was a moratorium on it for over 10 years. So most of the projects that have been done recently, we got nothing from the state. And Nashua has been really lucky because we're part of the city. The city has been, frankly, very generous with approving renovations to our schools, the middle school project, the elementary schools, and all of the security vestibules, which is tons of money. And they've really prioritized the safety of our students there. And I know lots of districts that are not in our boat who have schools that they've had to close because they could not afford to fix them. I'm thinking of like Derry, and Manchester has closed one because they couldn't afford to fix it. So, we've been really, really lucky, but I don't know just projecting forward without any state assistance and with declining enrollment and everybody feeling the pinch in this economy, I don't know how long we can be lucky without, driving people from their homes. Like, at some point, people are going to be taxed enough. I think we're there.
I think we're there.
I think we passed it already. So
I just want to say that I'm thankful that we're having this conversation and that we will continue to have these types of conversations as we come into budget season, because I know that we were asked, was there anything else that we needed? I sat in on that meeting, and I want to make sure that in March that we can at least ask and advocate for the things that we actually want and need. Like, this wasn't part of the budget. It had, you know what I mean? I want to make sure that everything that's important to the children of this district and everything, that we ask for it and that we set a plan, you know, because is so important. Like, when I wish, like I said, I don't know who, I know that Ms. Bishop, you took responsibility for not following up on this, but I don't blame you at all. I think that it's because of the process, and we're not sure, that we've said 100 times up here, we're just not sure how it goes, that we need to figure out exactly how that goes and what we are asking for, when we're asking for it, because it's important for this school year.
Right.
It, you know, if it was
Well,
our
and
first
we
go.
did ask for Stellos.
We did.
We did.
But what I'm saying is, who, in June, when we
In
talked about it
January.
again, in January, we
We
voted on it.
voted on it and we requested it, and then it went to the Capital Improvement Committee. It was in the Capital Improvement Program that was released in May.
When did we know that it was moved to
January.
C?
Well, we knew when,
So when they started up that ad hoc debt committee meeting, and all of the projects that were about to start were put on hold.
No, but I'm just saying, is so like us, as the school board,
well, it's not
as the
even
district.
other projects. It's not just us
Well,
as a
but
school
this
board, it's
one-
the city.
But I don't know
Okay,
that.
no, but I'm just saying, for Stellos, when did we find out that it was moved to C? And at that point, could we have went back and asked?
So that was presented at the end of that ad hoc committee. I think it was the middle of August.
Okay, so in
our-
August, we knew that it was a C.
At our McCarthy meeting, when we went to McCarthy.
Okay, so at McCarthy, so we knew in August. Could we have asked, just like we just did? We just did this. And that's what I'm saying, like, it's so important. It's so important because
Well, I mean, that's the
not-
thing. We did ask.
Did ask,
no,
and I
but
think
what I'm
And
saying,
then
in
it has
August
to
when.
go through we can ask, but we can't turn around and say, hey, you're wrong. You need to approve this.
Right,
Like,
and I think we
But just
also
like we
have to
went to
make
a-
a distinction between our operating budget and projects, capital improvement projects, because our operating
Right.
budget
Deferred
is-
maintenance,
is
operating,
for
and then projects.
ongoing routine expenses like paying our staff and
Right.
maintaining the building. So it would be for mowing the grass out there, but it's not for ripping up all the turf and replacing it. Right? So that's the difference between the two projects. And I think that the board was very clear, and Ms. Bishop went to the ad hoc meetings. Mr. Smith went and Dr. Andrade went and
Yeah.
said, this is what we need, here's why. The DPW already had all of the testing, right? We don't have I never saw the testing. I got it from a constituent who sent it to me, right? So I'm going to die on this hill of, I think Stellos is a weird case.
yes, definitely.
Because the funding and the people who use it and who's in charge of maintaining it versus scheduling it versus it's just all over the place. And it's messy.
And I can agree with
There are some things that all of our facilities need that are always going to go over the deferred maintenance cap, that we're always going to have to go back and ask the city for financial support for. But just because we ask them for it doesn't mean they're going to say yes. So what we want to know, and this is what I've been saying, is where does that conversation happen? Because it doesn't seem like it happens in public meetings. It's something that's done by the people who are planning this. Like when Sean presents us the information that he presents us, he's not working in front of us. He's presenting his report to us. The same thing happens at a city level. There is work that happens and then it's presented. So do I need to be at those work meetings advocating? Am I allowed to be at those meetings? Like, I remember asking if I could sit in on Alderman Dowd and Mr. Smith's conversations about, specifically when we went from the 3 vestibule project down to 2, why wasn't I at that meeting where we decided which 2 facilities we did and scrapped the 3rd? Like, that feels like something that the board should have been part
The
of that conversation.
JSSBC should have had that conversation as a board, right?
And,
And
right.
they did, and that's where,
So I think we're clearly identifying the pockets of where we need to shore things up. But I'm wondering too, one of the things that I had brought up before is, before COVID happened, we had a building committee. Do we think maybe we need to, I had talked about this before, do we think it would be helpful to restart that building committee so that we're not just, so that work is happening in public, in a committee, and not just presented in big, huge project time?
also, should we have a seat on the capital improvements? I mean, it's citizens, it's Board of Aldermen member representation, but there's no Board of Education representation on that
So I think we
committee.
can probably go to any and all meetings we want to go to and speak in their 3-minute public comment.
Yep.
Right, but actually having a
That-
seat at
yeah,
the table.
That doesn't feel adequate when we're talking about $1 million need. But, I mean, that's
But it's a
some of the
step.
digging that I can do.
Regarding the building committee, or it was called the construction committee, or building and construction committee, I don't know. It ended before my time. Like,
Right.
it never once met since I've been on
I
the
think it
board.
only met quarterly.
So I have no idea what they did.
Okay. Maybe that's you and I.
But it seems like the financial costing sheets,
Yeah.
that would be a great time to do that.
So anyway, that's the Stellos update.
But I just want to say one last thing. I do appreciate that, I don't know who ordered the testing again in October, but I do appreciate the attention to detail there, to say, hey, it was called out in January, it was called out in July as being questionable as well, so let's test it again, even though it's mid-season and it might upset people, let's put the kids' safety first and test it again. So I appreciate that as a parent, so I'd rather have it closed and have to borrow someone else's facility than have a kid get hurt.
And Sauhegan High School has been a fantastic community partner in having our students go over and play under the lights over there. So just a huge shout out to some neighborly awesomeness. And
That's fantastic.
But we also had a first, and I think it was mentioned at the last meeting. We had our first high school football game on this campus between North and BG. So it was a Saturday morning. I heard it was a wonderful event, but it's also, again, almost the old school, days of Saturday morning. And so even though it was disappointing, again, it was North and BG. They both used Stellos. They were able to utilize the field here. And from all accounts, I heard it was a wonderful turnout. So.
And it was a lot of fun. I was at the field hockey game the night before watching. I mean, Lisa was out there staking the ground with the poles to create the barriers, and just so many people rallying together to make everything happen. She had the coaches there, and
Just a shout out to Miss Gingras. She's been fantastic.
yep.
And a shout out to all the coaches who have done a tremendous
pivoting.
job with this, and the students who have been very accommodated and even excited, with these games. The fact that they get to play them still, they're just excited about. And Sauhegan allowing those games to be played under the lights over there is tremendous. So it's one of these situations where the community really stepped up.
The greater community, not just ours.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. Okay, transportation update.
Yeah, I mean, just really quick, again, just thanking the community for their patience. I learned more about transportation software systems in the last 8 weeks than I could ever imagine. We've uncovered a lot of the root of the causes. So next week, this past week, we were running about 98% of the buses being on time. There was a couple things that happened at Pennachuck today where they're making some of the changes in a missed kind of communication. There was one bus that was running way too long and was overcrowded. So when you change one thing, something else kind of breaks in a lack of communication. But we are in a good place. We were able to fix our student information software system that the three systems, Tyler, which is the routing software, X2, which is the parent portal, and First Student uses a different software. They're all now talking to each other. One big ask that's going to be coming out next week is to all the families, is to ensure that their addresses are correct. Interesting enough that it's we don't ask for address verification on a yearly basis. So when
Probably we should do that.
so interesting, an unintended consequence coming out of here. This process, when we were having a lot of conversations with families, they're like, we used what we thought was the right information in X2 to build the routes. And then when families like, it's at the wrong stop, we're like, where do you live? We have you at X, Y, and Z street. And they're like, I moved 2 years ago. And so then you have to change the system, change the stop, and again, a ripple effect. So we want to make sure we have clean data. So there will be a notification kind of going out next week to families, ensuring that the addresses are correct and that aspect of it. So, and again, those were some of the issues that we ran into. Is like, well, we think we have a safe route, and then, or we think we have you at this stop, and you're at a different location. So it was a lot of one-offs. We think we're in really, really good shape. Again, buses last week were running on time. The routes were looked at. The systems are now kind of connected. The issue that happens on a day-to-day basis that is sometimes beyond our control, a bus driver calls in sick, a monitor calls in sick, a bus monitor. They might have to double up routes. And that's some of the reality that we're dealing with as well. So we can build a perfect system and the routes running on paper efficiently. But if there's a bus driver that's out or a monitor that's out, we might have to double out some aspects. So we're trying to collect that data as well as how often that happens. So again, I really want to thank the community for their patience. I know we've been making a lot of calls. And really, any conversation that I have with a parent, or I know the conversations where the parent's like, I'm sorry for, coming across this way. Thank you. You're advocating for the safety of your kid. So again, where we never took it as being offensive or that aspect of it. Like, please continue to advocate for your kid and the safety of all kids. So, but I think we're at a good place now. And there's a couple still tweaks that we make all the time. There's new students being registered. There's, students who are leaving. And so, but I think we're at a good place. And the transportation app, we'll verify it again this week, but it should be up and running next week so parents could track where the buses are. Where the three systems not talking to each other, the app wasn't working because it wasn't the right information. So I think we're in a good place now.
I just have a follow-up question. Some of the concerns that I heard were about kind of this monitor situation. If there's an issue with needing to double up the buses, whose responsibility is it to reach out to the family to expect their kid home an hour later, which I think is egregious because lots of people schedule appointments and $60 for a missed appointment fee can devastate some families.
Yeah, so if the system's working properly, we would have notification from First Student that bus 202 is going to be doubled up. And then if the system is working properly, I have a roster of all the students who are on 202, and typically the building principal or the building would be sending an email saying, FYI, 202 is running late, or going to be running late. So that's in a perfect world. That's how it happens.
So in some of the imperfect situations is people are getting these notifications when their child is supposed to be arriving at home.
Yeah, and so that's, again, where we need the three systems talking to each other. And we have a daily phone call for a student right now saying, what is your staffing? And it shouldn't be a surprise if you have a monitor or not. So that is one of our KPIs with them on, do they have proper staffing? So if you're down on monitor, we should be able to know and put that out there.
Yeah. Because I think sometimes if families know, they can go pick up their kid if there's something going on, but they need that information ahead of time.
Happy fact, First Student is hiring bus monitors. They're starting at $18.50. That's more than McDonald's.
Yes.
Para.
Cut us off at the knees, Christine.
I was in that negotiation.
Yes.
I remember that negotiation. We tried.
So I think we're on a good trajectory now. What needed to happen to get the three systems talking to each other? So I just want to identify problems, because next year, when the start of the school, if we know what the problems are, we know, same with Stella. If we know what the problems are and what to plan for, let's just plan for them.
So we've been working with Tyler Solutions, which is the routing aspect of it. Some of it was setting up the reports to run. It was miscoded. And so so when you put in the structure, just the way things were coded. And so we had to go back and say, hey, in May, we actually wrote the wrong code so that systems weren't talking. So we found that. And then other aspects were where you're working in the right term. So again, what version 1, version 2, version 3. And so it was version 1, we were operating in version 1, but mistakes were being the routing or the pathway was looking at a different version. So, but you don't know that until you start unpacking it. And you're like, why isn't this working? So it was a lot of discovery and aspects of it. So we're in good shape now, and I don't see this being an issue going forward.
I'm holding you to that.
Oh, geez, yeah. So.
Yeah, I don't think that there's been much more of a frustrating time, which is unfortunate because, well,
That's where we're at.
tuck and roll. We'll get there. Okay, so I have no other points on the agenda, and because this was a work session, I don't think we have board member comment. Unless somebody is dying to say something they have not yet said tonight.
Motion to adjourn.
Second that motion.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are now adjourned at 8:30. Thank you, guys.